We often don't think of hormones when we're eating food, but really the way we feel and the way our body reacts to food is controlled by many types of hormones. One of them is ghrelin. Now, ghrelin is often called the hunger hormone because when our stomach's empty, then the lining of our stomach has cells that are going to secrete ghrelin at a rapid rate. And this gives us an intense hunger. Although if we eat a meal that's really starchy, rich in carbohydrates and sweet, which is also carbohydrate, sugar is, then the lining of our stomach sometimes doesn't respond, and so we just keep feeling hungry even though we're eating lots and lots of calories of sweets. Not a good situation. We can slow down the production of ghrelin, which is usually a good idea, when we eat something that's dense caloric. So I'm thinking of cheese, peanut butter, foods that are rich in lipids and proteins. And that'll tell the body, hey, I'm satisfied. Cut back on the ghrelin, would you? Or there's a procedure called bariatric surgery where the inferior, that's the lower part of the stomach, and the first part of the small intestines, which is called the duodenum, are bypassed with a laparoscope, also called a gastric bypass. And there also has to be some lifestyle changes that go along with this. We don't just conduct this surgery on anyone. There has to be some commitment. Now we have to have a balancing hormone because we can't go around hungry all the time, because how can we focus? And that's the job of leptin. It's going to oppose ghrelin. It's not released from the lining of the stomach, but instead from the adipose tissue when our stomach is full. And this allows us to do things, because if we're constantly hungry, well, we're going to just search for food and eat, and we can't do that. We need to, historically, early humans had to sharpen tools and fix their shelters and so forth, so they can't go around being hungry. Now, if you don't have enough leptin receptors, then you'll feel hungry almost all the time, and those people tend to eat more than they need and gain weight. We are one long hollow tube from mouth to anus, and that's why you can eat a piece of plastic one day and it comes out the next, pretty much the same as it looks when it went in. The inner lining is the mucosa. It's just a layer of epithelial cells, very fragile, and that's why most biologists don't recommend activities that would injure that tissue, like anal sex, for example. It's not, the GI tract is not a vagina. It's not designed for that kind of abrasive action. Submucosa, that is the layer that you can blame when you have pain, because this is where the nerves, the blood vessels, and the lymph vessels are. If you've ever had gas pains, you know what I'm talking about. Outside of this are layers of smooth muscle, and they will contract in wave-like peristaltic contractions that help to move that feces past the sphincter. And we know that feeling too. You have to go to the bathroom, but the bathroom's a long ways away. Now you got to go when you got to go, because as people get older, that defecation reflex gets weaker if they ignore this peristalsis. And pretty soon, a person in their 60s or 70s, they forgot what it feels like to have a good, powerful bowel movement. They have to use laxatives instead, and that's a poor substitute. Starting at the mouth, enamel is rock hard, made of dense deposits of calcium, but it doesn't shatter because we have a flexion provided by Dentin. And then inside is the living layer called the pulp, where there's blood vessels and nerves. The tooth sits in a sulcus or a socket with a root canal there. Around it is a velar bone, and it's stimulated by pressure. So we have to eat tough foods. So when you get to the end of that carrot, you chew it right to the end. You get a bit of gristle from the meat. You work on that till your jaw's tired, because you don't want to be in your 60s and 70s and have your teeth falling out because the velar bone is not getting stimulated. Salivary glands, they contain, well, lots of things. Enzymes such as amylase and others that are breaking down food and destroying microbes. We're also going to buffer those strong acids with bicarbonates, and this protects the enamel of our teeth. There's slippery, slick mucins that lubricate the bolus. Now, see, when we swallow food, it's not like a trickle, it's a ball that our tongue rolls together. The glands include the parotoid on the cheeks, sometimes get infected. Submandibular, sub means under, mandible, under the mandible, or jaw. And finally, the ones that squirt, the sublingual, under the tongue. Swallowing, there's stages of swallowing. The first is when you can talk and you're just getting ready to swallow. That's a voluntary because there's skeletal muscles in the pharynx. They're going to push that bolus to the back, and then the esophagus is still closed. And so this is when people chat, they have a little food in their mouth. Okay, fine. But the next stage is different. Involuntary involves smooth muscles we have no conscious control over. The epiglottis, if you look at that finger-like projection, it's going to drop down and block off the trachea, which is our airway. And so now we can't talk. And we shouldn't talk because that bolus is coming down. And you don't want to sing or talk at the wrong time, or that bolus gets pulled into the trachea and we have possible choking. All right, thanks to peristalsis of the smooth muscles, the bolus usually goes down the right way, which is the esophagus. The stomach gets a lot of credit for things it doesn't do. Primarily, it's a mixing chamber. Of course, okay, it makes us feel hungry and satisfied too, but it contains gastric fluids, which are a cocktail mix of pepsin enzyme, hydrochloric acid, and other chemicals that break apart food. At the top is it's kind of funny, okay, it's at the top, but it's called the lower esophageal sphincter. And that is the opening of the upper part of the stomach. On the lower end, there's a pyloric sphincter. These sphincters are always going to prevent backflow. Here is where, the lower part is where the chyme collects. Chyme is just the mixture, it's kind of a milky substance. It's very acidic because it has hydrochloric acid and it's food particles. If you've ever had a long vomiting episode, this is that bitter substance that makes you shudder. Well, hopefully you never have to experience this. The lower esophageal sphincter is going to constrict to prevent backflow, but sometimes backflow occurs, especially if there's an esophageal hiatus, which is not a terrible thing, but if there's a lot of inflammation from reflux, then we have what's called a positive feedback loop. Positive means there's no off switch. It just keeps going. So there's inflammation. The body thinks, hey, we better fix this. We'll dump some acid on it. Maybe it's a bacteria. And then it just makes the problem worse. And we have a hiatal hernia now that's swollen above the diaphragm where it doesn't belong. And painful, interferes with digestion, lots of problems. Now we had hormones, Ghrelin and Leptin, that affect hunger and satisfaction. We also have hormones that affect the emptying of the stomach. Because, you know, think of it, long ago, we just had a big meal, we're walking across the savannah, and here comes a lion. We got to be able to run fast. We're not going to do that if our stomach is full for hours. So gastrin, think of gastric fluid, is going to be released when our stomach's full, and the hydrochloric acid then is going to pour into our stomach, break down food, and get the digestion moving along. Now, we don't want this to go on forever, so somatostatin, think of stopping, is released when the stomach is empty. And so now we protect our stomach lining. One of the painful things you could do is when your stomach is empty, trick it into thinking there's going to be food coming, such as chewing gum on an empty stomach, or sometimes a little bit of coffee at the wrong time. The body thinks, hey, food's on the way, let's dump a lot of gastrin in there and prepare for this onslaught of food, and it never arrives. And so now you have a stomach full of gastric fluid and acid, but nothing for it to work on but your stomach lining. So be careful of that one.